When are back extensions worse than bird dogs? What we're going to do in this tutorial is look at two specific types of lower back pain that someone may have that are not effectively rehabilitated by back extensions. When are back extensions worse than bird dogs? What we're going to do in this tutorial is look at two specific types of lower back pain where back extensions are an ineffective type of rehabilitation, and we're going to look at how we can start rehabilitating these types of lower back pain more effectively, and we'll look at the bird dog as one effective way of doing that. If you are suffering with lower back pain and you do want some help, click the link below and you'll go through to my How to Overcome Lower Back Pain online consultation and coaching, where you can book on, we can get things planned out, and we can get you on a proper rehab strategy. The first type of back pain is a compression intolerance. So that is where the muscles of your lower back are essentially squeezing your spine. Much like if you had a sponge in your hand and you sort of wrap your hand around it, squeezing the sponge. So when this happens in a back extension, I'll use this as the example. So this is more, or this happens more at the top of the back extension. When you come down to here, this is a different type of back pain that we're going to talk about next. But what happens down here, when you drop down, is the muscles switch off, or they don't switch off, they disengage, let's say, because it will just dampen how much they engage the more you go down and the more the spine flexes. As you come back up and you get the spine into that more neutral posture, hanging over, that's when the muscles are locked on, and that's when the compression happens. So if you have a spine that is compression intolerant, you won't want to use this exercise as a way of rehabilitating, because when you get into this position, there is a lot of compression because you've got the muscles of the lower back really squashing on the spine. So what you're essentially doing is you're triggering the mechanism for your pain. So that is why, or that is one example when this type of back extension, or even back extension when you're on the floor, is an ineffective rehabilitation, because what you're essentially doing, if you've been assessed properly and it comes out with you have a compression intolerance, i.e. your spine doesn't like compression, the last thing you then want to be doing is putting high loads of compression around the spine. Now, in rehabilitation, I do understand that muscles need to be conditioned and muscles need to be progressively overloaded, but there are better ways of doing it, because this would be considered much more advanced because of the high levels of compression that go around the spine when you do it. With someone with a back problem, you need to take as much of that compression away as possible, not only in exercise but also in everyday life, to be able to rehabilitate properly. Because one of the things that gets thrown at me a lot is that very thing about you need to condition the muscles, you need to get into this, you need to build tolerance, you need to rehabilitate, and all this kind of stuff. And that is true. That I agree with that. That's what you need. But we need to understand where we need to start from, and it may be somewhere very different than starting here, and that's what we'll talk about in the next part of the tutorial. But what we're going to do now, so we've got trigger number one, which is compression. So that is one reason why you wouldn't use a back extension, be it on the floor or on some sort of rack like this one. So we want to move away from high levels of compression. The second type of lower back pain is when it goes through, or it's a flexion and or extension intolerance. So again, your spine doesn't like being in the flexed position or being in the extended position. So what we have to understand, and what you can also get, is compression and flexion and extension, or combinations of the three. So again, if you're being assessed properly, if you're being asked the right questions, if you're being asked to go through the right assessments, this will start to unfold and you'll start to understand this. If that comes out of that assessment, then you will be able to understand what exercise is going to be more effective for you. So when we're talking about flexion and extension cycles, what we're talking about, so we come into this position, it's when we go into a flexion, which could be full flexion, full extension, full flexion, full extension. So during that cycle, there are spines out there that do not like this. If, like I've mentioned, you go through a proper consultation and assessment, this will start to come out, and it will start to tell you that your spine doesn't like these types of positions. This is what I'm saying the back extension is not good for, because it's not me saying that I don't like back extensions, therefore no one should do back extensions. What I'm doing is I'm taking an individual, I'm taking them through a set of questions and a set of assessments, and with the information that comes out of that, it starts to tell me their spine doesn't like compression, their spine doesn't like flexion, their spine doesn't like extension, their spine doesn't like something else, their spine doesn't have much endurance, their spine has instability. So these are just 3 things that can come out of it. There are more things that can come out of it. But with regards to back extensions, these are 2 common things that backs don't like, or compression intolerant, flexion and extension intolerant backs don't like. And by doing this, you're essentially doing compression and you're doing flexion and you're doing extension with this type of exercise. So if you have a back like that, then this isn't going to be a useful exercise for you. So what we've got to try and do is we've got to try and think of things that we can start to do to rehabilitate and condition and activate and progressively overload these types of muscles. But it means starting in a very different place than this type of exercise. Now we're going to start looking at ways that we can start building tolerance. We're going to use the bird dog as an example, and I want to be very clear about saying this is an example. There are other exercises out there, there are other places to start, but what I'm doing is I'm selecting one that again could be useful. Now this doesn't mean that everyone needs to do it, because again that will come out in a proper consultation and assessment where we start. But to help people understand how to progress and possible the principles of how to progress and where to start, we're going to use the bird dog as the example. I want to be very clear on that, because this isn't a one size fits all, everyone should stop doing this and start doing bird dogs. This is just saying, in this example, when back extensions are bad, here is another example of when bird dogs can replace that. And hopefully that makes sense to people watching. So, how we do it. So basically, when we go down into a bird dog, so we come down onto all fours, into this position, and we lift like so. Now, again, there are more teaching points than that, but as again, just an example, that's the position that we need to go in. Opposite arm, opposite leg need to be extended. So, with regards to the compression intolerant back, so the spine that doesn't like compression, this is more advantageous for a couple of reasons. Number one, we've got our hands on the floor. So our muscles don't have to do as much work as when there's nothing on the floor. So now my back muscles have got to work really hard. As soon as I put one hand on the floor, I can literally feel them soften. If I pick them up, I can feel them harden. So again, just by putting the hand on the floor, I reduce the compression. It will increase ever so slightly as I pick one up, but what we've done is we've decreased the compression around the spine just by putting the hands on the floor. Now, the bird dog, because of the way it's designed, by one arm and one leg goes up, and then you swap sides and go the other way, you've got essentially half the muscles working than up here, because you've got essentially both arms off the floor. So you've got both arms off the floor, which makes them more active anyway, and you're only lifting one limb or opposite limbs. So again, the other side isn't working because only one side is working. So you've halved the compression. So you've reduced the compression, but what you've started to get is muscle activation. So by that, when you lift an arm up off the floor, to hold your upper back up, you've got muscles starting to work in here. So you're starting to activate them, but you're not aggravating the lower back. So you've got the activation that you want, So you're starting to get the condition, the muscle engagement that you want, but at a reduced compression. What we've then got is the glutes working at the back. So we've now starting to look at support. So we're now starting to look at muscles around the lower back. So muscles of the mid back and the glutes and the hips. And what that's doing, that's pulling taut the thoracolumbar fascia, which is a fascia that wraps across the lower back. And essentially when you've got the muscle, so latissimus dorsi, glute and glute, they pull it tight like a person on like a tea towel, for example, and you pull each corner nice and tight in a diamond shape. It pulls it taut, and what that does is that helps lift the spine and hold it in place. But again, because of the muscle compression around it is at a minimum, you don't get the compression around the spine. So you don't get as much of the detrimental effect, but you get much more of the benefit of the engagement. So it's a much more effective way of starting someone. Now again, as I mentioned, there are other ways of doing this, and that kind of stuff will come out in a consultation and assessment. But for the principles of this, it helps highlight what's going on in an exercise like that, understanding the mechanism, and then why this is different and why this could be a more effective way of doing it. And then logically, when you think about it, a lot of compression probably makes sense not to do it because my spine doesn't like it. A lot less compression, but good muscle activation, it seems to make more sense to do something like this. So we have to understand it in that way. So that's one way. If you've got a compression intolerance within your spine, this could be a more effective way of doing it. But to get a proper answer, you would need to go through some sort of consultation and assessment to be a lot more specific about that. The second trigger is the flexion and extension cycles. Now, there are a couple of other things that come along with the flexion extension cycles. So it affects a number of things. So it affects the vertebra in the fact that when you flex, the muscles start to turn off. What that does, that increases the anterior shear loading on the vertebra. What you also get is when you go through the flexion and extension cycle, what you start to get is a delamination of the disc because it wears it out. If you do it enough, the disc starts to become a lot less firm, let's say. It's not rigid, it's just there's a firm flexibility to it. And the disc starts to lose that, and then that can contribute towards bulges and herniations. So it's not necessarily the actual cause of it, but it's that mechanism that's happening as well. So we've got the anterior shear, we've got the delamination of the disc, and in the more extended postures, we've got additional load on facet joints at the back, or between the vertebra. So what we have to do is, again, with all of those three sort of mechanisms where pain could come out of or can contribute to pain, we have to manage that. So if we come back down into the bird dog again, and let's talk about what the bird dog is doing or not doing for these three mechanisms. So when we come down into this position, as I've mentioned, we come down into that position and we hold. So what we're doing is we're maintaining a neutral posture. So what we're not doing with this posture is going flexion, extension, flexion, extension. Now, although there is less load going through the spine, we are still contributing to that mechanism. So if we understand that you have a flexion extension cycle intolerance, then again we need to try and minimize that mechanism as much as possible. And again, I highlight the word minimize. We may not be able to eliminate it, but if we can get it down as little as possible, then we're not going to be aggravating the problem as much as if we were just doing it all the time. So that's one thing that we've got with this exercise, is when we do it, we maintain the posture of the spine. So when we lift the leg up, we don't lift it up like that. We slide the foot away and we maintain the position of the spine whilst activating the glute. And it's the same with the arm. So we remove that mechanism which will affect the discs and will affect the facet joints. So we take that out just simply by using the bird dog as a means of helping. Another thing that we do to mitigate the anterior shear, so when we come into this position and we maintain that posture through the spine, what happens is, because we're activating the muscles, and as I mentioned last time, we're pulling that T-tile taut at each corner. So we're pulling that taut so it's nice and firm and fixed. So that helps stabilize the spine, number one. Number two, because that's pulling tight, the vertebra join into the bottom of it. So what it also does, when it's pulled taut, it neutralizes and creates like a posterior shearing force, which neutralizes the anterior shearing force. So you've got an anterior shear, which is trying to make the vertebra sort of fall forwards, but then you've got this posterior shear pulling it backwards. So you've got a load on the spine, but again, a reduced load on the spine because of the position that we're in. And also what we've got is that neutralizing stopping of the anterior shear happening, which again can all contribute to problems in the spine. So with regards to the two mechanisms, which is compression and the flexion extension cycles, hopefully you can start to see why a bird dog is so useful, because it's not just a case of getting on the floor and just lifting your arms up. It's like, why am I doing this bird dog? There are reasons for doing what you're doing and understanding why you're doing them. And there are reasons why you can stop doing back extensions and why it may not be the most effective place to start. And there may be more effective places to start you off in your rehabilitation journey. Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this content, please do hit the like button below. If you've got a question or a comment, please do leave it down in the comment section below. If you've learned something new from this tutorial, please do hit the thanks button. And if you want to watch more videos like this, please do hit the subscribe and bell icon.